Hi, my name is Ruth, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk on human trafficking and some of the legal aspects of it. So, I'll be talking to you in detail on what human trafficking is all about, and also what are the legal consequences as well as legal procedures involved while filing a case. For each of the processes, things are different. So, we'll just hit base on some of the most important aspects that can be covered and that should be covered while we are, following procedures under human trafficking. So if you ask me, what is human trafficking? It's basically exploitation of human beings for different reasons and for different purposes. It's one of the most largest, third profitable illegal industries in the world. There's too much profits coming out of it, and that is why, it is thriving as well. It has been going on for years together. If you see, this has not been a practice that started off very recently, but if you see time immemorial, we have seen a lot of slavery like situations as well, and human trafficking was there for a long period of time. And with the advent of technology, what we've seen is it's increased, and also a lot of other reasons like geopolitical factors, the pandemic, refugee like situation. All of these are some of the main reasons why we see human trafficking increasing, because it usually happens when things are much more harder for a community to thrive. It could be due to war, it could be due to poverty, it could be just economic situations just suddenly dropping down. And so a community which is facing a lot of financial situations would definitely be trapped, as well as people who are really from a vulnerable community. So that's why we see that in these zones, like a war zone or in a pandemic like situation or an earthquake or anything when there is a lot of emergency like situations, the vulnerable community gets affected first, and that means women and children are some of the first victims to human trafficking. And also, we need to understand that though we have legal procedures and we have strong laws, there's still a lot of gap in the way we actually function. And that is also the reason why, human trafficking is thriving. There's still a gap of proper implementation. Now, if you see human trafficking, especially sexual exploitation, in most of the time, 71% of all the trafficking victims worldwide, whether it's sexual exploitation or whether it's labor exploitation, or whether they are forced to work as soldiers, or whether they are forced to work, under cartels, that could be drug cartels or human cartels. Most of the time, the biggest victims are women and children, and obviously girls who are part of the children's group. And also 3 out of the 4 trafficked women are most of the time sexually exploited. And that is the reason why sexual exploitation is much higher in women. I'm not saying it's not happening within men and within boys, but it's slightly higher. But we also have a lot of data to show that even boy children are actually assaulted and abused during this human trafficking circles. And so it is a huge issue that we are facing right now. So we have different covenants for it. We have protocol to prevent, suppress, punish, and trafficking in women, trafficking in persons, especially women and children. Then we have the forced labor convention. So the other one, which is also known as the Palermo Protocol, is something that deals with human trafficking, which talks about human trafficking a lot. Many of the countries have adopted definitions under the Palermo Protocol. So it is one of the biggest conventions where countries have come together and recognize that human trafficking is an issue and that needs to be dealt with in the most efficient and procedural manner. Now, in India, if you see, we did not have a specific law on human trafficking for a long period of time. We have the constitution, which clearly prohibits all kinds of trafficking. That it clearly lays down that under Article 23, trafficking in human beings and beggar or any other forms of forced labor are prohibited. So that stands as the backbone of all our laws. But even though we had this constitution clearly laid out, we did not have laws emanating specifically on on human trafficking, but we actually had different laws to take care of different exploitation. So it was seen at different aspects of statutes. If you see, some of it was spoken about in the Juvenile Justice Act, some of it was seen in POCSO. POCSO is basically to protect children from sexual abuse among children. And also some, we have laws like Prevention of Marriage Act, or, the Child Marriage Prohibition Act. BLSA, Bonded Labor Abolition Act, is again to obviously protect people who are suffering from bonded labor like situations, but we did not have a specific definition, and so it was difficult for the judges also to interpret what human trafficking was all about. So it came about only with the Criminal Amendment Act in 2013, and this happened after the unfortunate incident of Nirbhaya, wherein obviously a committee was formulated because there was a lot of hue and cry stating that our criminal laws are not doing good enough for women. Obviously, there was a committee formulated under the aegis of Justice Verma. And so this is known, we all call them very popularly known as the Justice Verma Committee, which actually brought about the whole concept of different laws that should be in place, and also brought about changes in law. So that's how in 2013 there was a lot of amendment made in both in the IPZ, in the Indian Evidence Act. We had specific additional clauses that has came into being, but it was in 2013 that we actually recognized the definition of human trafficking, and we see that as a definition under 370 of the Indian Penal Code. So right now we have a definition. Before it was mostly known as habitual dealing in slaves, and it did not have all the ingredients that was required to be considered as human trafficking. Because if you see, human trafficking is not just a set of people exploiting. There's a lot of organized crime involved, and that was not being looked into even from an enforcement point of view. So it was through 2013 and through the Justice Verma's recommendations that this came as a law. And right now under 370 we have something known as the human trafficking, wherein they have recognized the definition as well. And now we have the trafficking bill as well. It is still not passed, but if passed, it will be a comprehensive law that will talk about the procedures as well as the requirements as well as the rights that a victim can have, which we hopefully would see very soon. Now, let me just go into human trafficking. If you see the definition, it's a huge definition. It goes in like trafficking in persons as recruitment, transportation, transfer, harbor, recruitment by means of threat or use of force or forms of coercion or abduction or fraud, the abuse of power or a position of vulnerability or of giving or receiving of payments or benefits to achieve the consent of a person having control over another person for the purposes of exploitation. Exploitation shall include sexual exploitation, forced labor or services, slavery or practices similar to slavery, servitude or removal of organs. So if you see, the wordings are very similar to the Palermo Protocol, and that's why I would say, this is the starting way of understanding what human trafficking is all about. So if I'm going to break it down for better understanding, because all of us, when we read this law, it seems like too difficult to understand, right? But under the trafficking law, there are basically three ingredients that's required. That's an act, a means, and a purpose. Now, when you come to act mainly talks about recruitment, transportation, transferring a person, harboring a person, right? And receipt. Now, when you say recruitment, what we see is usually, all of the victims, they are usually very safe in their communities. It could be their hometown, like a place in Tamil Nadu, or they must be from, a good place in Bangalore. They are kind of safe. So the first part is to actually, bring them out of the safety network, right? And that's where you do, a kind of recruitment. It could be, or receipt, so it's what we see is that, they try, to remove them out of the safety network through different means, right? And that means could be a threat or a force or coercion or abduction, fraud, abuse of power, deception, or inducement. What we see is that when a victim, for example, in many of our cases, we see that, they were very happy, but suddenly something happened in their hometown and they need to get out in a way to save themselves. What we see in bonded labor like situation is, suddenly one of their members falls sick, or suddenly one of their members in the family has to get married, so they need money. Or in sexual exploitation like cases, what you see is suddenly, the person wants to look out for a better job, or they fall in love with someone. And there is nothing wrong in all of this, right? All of us go through the same thing, but the trafficker, he uses the means to ensure that they are out of their safety networks. So, either they would, force them to come out, or they would use inducement like things, saying that, you will get a better job, I will take you, I love you so much, like, let me take you to a better place. And obviously, when you're a victim and you trust the person so much that you're ready to accept whatever the person says. Now, especially when you've taken a loan, right? Or when you want to clear the expenses of a funeral, and you don't have enough money, and suddenly a person says, hey, I will be there to help you, you suddenly begin to trust that person, right? And that's what we see in both in bonded labor, sexual exploitation, or any other kind of exploitation, is there's always a kind of inducement, and then, it's also a combination of inducement and then slowly coercion. Sometimes it's abduction and other reasons, right? So it's through an act, means, and finally leading into a purpose of exploitation. And again, exploitation, if you see, it can be different kinds of exploitation. It could be a combination of exploitation too. In many of the bonded labor like situations, what we see is the victim is actually, suddenly there's an issue at home. They had to cover expenses, or they had to cover, suddenly someone loses a job, and what they do is they go to the nearest person. The nearest person would be a trafficker, saying that, hey, why don't you, just come with me to Bangalore, I would provide you with everything, just like an assurance, I'm giving you an advance of 5,000 or 10,000, right? And so the entire family, seeing that amount, is so happy because they are so desperate to get some kind of money. And so they take that money, and the entire family, that includes a husband, wife, and children, all of them are displaced from a safety network. Actually, if they are at their own place, they at least know the language, they know who to approach, they have families to help them out. But the first thing the trafficker does is to ensure that they're displaced from a safety network. So the entire family is taken from there. They are like transported. Even at the transport, what we see is even the, most of the officials are involved, or the transport agents are involved in the entire thing. Then they are taken from their places of or their sources of their villages, which could be Tamil Nadu, or it could be Andhra, it could be a place like Orissa, and they're taken from there, and then they're put in trains and brought into places like Karnataka, and wherein they don't know the language, they don't know the people. There's a lot of fear within them because they cannot even communicate. And then these people are taken to brick factories or construction factories, where they are forced to work without any kind of minimum wage. They are forced to work for 18 hours a day. Children are not allowed to go to school. They are forced to work, and they are not paid anything. The hygiene is just below basic levels, and they go into a lot of poverty like situation, but they still can't ask for anything, because they exploited. They're physically exploited, they're mentally exploited, because even if they ask for their wages, then if that person is beaten up by the owner's men, or tied up, and their legs are broken, or they are sexually assaulted in some cases. So that's how the exploitation happens. And in a place you're so new and you don't know anybody, even people who are around will not be there to help someone who's coming from a different state, right? And that's the situation. And most of us who are in the city, we kind of get oblivious to the situation, right? We just want to work, get back home, and be okay with that, right? And the same thing happens in every part of the state. And most of the time when you're from a different state, you don't have the trust on anybody, because you're already, the trust is already broken, right? um, so that is the purpose. And so in some cases you see a labor like situation, in some cases it's sexual exploitation, in some cases girl children are married off and exploited. If you see in Kerala, there's a lot of marriages taking place where a young women, not girls, but the young women are like made to marry older men from places like the Gulf, which could be Oman or Bahrain or any place, and wherein they are then exploited in those countries. So all of this are part of trafficking, and it's so organized, right? That's the most important thing. It's very, very organized. And we also have other things like forced removal of their organs are also a part of human trafficking. In some cases they are asked to carry drugs, there are cartels involved, and sometimes it's a combination of all of this, right? As the cartels are powerful, they ensure that human victims are made to do all kinds of illegal things, starting from labor to sexual, and as well as drugs and arms and other things. So we have different laws to take care of each. Though we have human trafficking as one section, which is a very serious section, the punishment ranges from 7 to 10 years, and in some cases up to life. We also have other procedural laws that we need to follow. For example, if they include sexual exploitation and there is a sex racketing included, we have a separate set of procedural laws wherein under the ITPA, we call it the ITPA or the Immoral Traffic Prevention Act, where there's a special police, a special officer, or a special police officer designated who is supposed to do the rescue, nobody else. So that is why we need to understand laws. And it's just not it's not just easy to take a rescue, make a rescue happen. We have procedures in place. We need to ensure that a team is formulated. So under sexual exploitation, if you see, or if there's children being trafficked for sexual exploitation, obviously we should utilize ITPA laws, and the procedures are quite different. And the same thing applies also to POCSO. So in POCSO, again, this is basically to protect children for child sexual abuse. So if you are seeing a child being sexually exploited, you have to be more careful that you utilize the procedures under the ITPA, the IPC, obviously human trafficking, and also include POCSO laws. And the reason why we do that is to ensure that the person who has committed the crime is pinned and the accountability is put on them, and the judges see this as a grievous offense. As when you see more and more sections added, the judges also understand that this is a very serious offense, right? And for POCSO, again, the punishment ranges much higher. It doesn't start off with 3 or 4 years. The punishment starts with 7 years. So, and POCSO, the good thing in POCSO is that when there is POCSO sections added, there is a special investigation team. There's also a special court to adjudicate matters like especially for children, so that the child is not traumatized, the child feels more comfortable to talk about what has happened to the child. And that is why POCSO is very, very important, and we need to add those sections if it's applicable in our cases, right? And again, IPC has a lot of general sections, especially if there's abduction involved. We have separate sections for it, and we need to add those sections, right, in the same way. We also have an act known as the Bonded Labor Abolition Act, which is BLSA, which is quite very much prevalent in almost all states. Many of the laborers are being exploited like bonded laborers. Again, here the procedures are very, very different. The procedures here starts with the district magistrate as the main person to look into the aspects, and he needs to formulate his team. And also, when you are doing such a rescue, it is important to do an inquiry and also to provide release certificates, right? So a release certificate is again a proof that they are free of any debt. 1, 2, the victims get compensation when you show the release certificate, and also it's a process of identity, and also it's an evidence in court. So all of this, it is important that we utilize this act. So as you look into the facts and circumstances, it's not just enough that you have a human trafficking law. You need to understand that for each and every exploitation, there are other procedural laws which we need to utilize, right? Again, if it's child labor, please utilize child labor laws, especially when you formulate a team, and if you know the fact that the child is being exploited, use a labor inspector as well within the team, so that child laborers get their compensation. And this is also highlighted in the charge sheet, right? In many of the times when children are involved, we also utilize JJA, Juvenile Justice Act, because the procedures are very different. How a child needs to be treated, especially if there is a group of children, we have to utilize the procedures of Juvenile Justice Act, which starts off with the fact that if a child is rescued, the child needs to be produced before the Child Welfare Committee within 24 hours. And then the Child Welfare Committee is the main source who decides on how to take care of the child. Obviously, reports needs to be given, like home inquiry report on where the child is from, who the child needs to go to, whether the home that the child is back is safe, whether the child can go back and be repatriated. And if there is a repatriation process, again, the CWC should be in charge. So all of that is taken care of by under the Juvenile Justice Act. And then we have something known as the SC or the ST Act, or prevent, that is basically to protect any kind of caste atrocities. And if there is caste atrocities embedded with bonded labor, again we can utilize this section and the act. And the good thing about this act is, again, the investigation is done by a much higher officer like the DSP, and so your investigation team is going to be different. And also there is a compensation attached to the victims under the SCST Act, right? And we have also the other laws, like in some cases, if it's a Child Marriage Act, then we can utilize the sections of child marriage. If there's involved a human organ transplantation act, is another act that you can utilize in cases where you see smuggling of organs. In many of the cases, especially when I was in Bombay trying to help out with the human trafficking circle with respect to child trafficking, we tried to use also protection and use the MOCA Act, or Maharashtra Control of Organized Crime Act. And in many cases here right now in Karnataka, what we see is many of the children are being utilized as in the online platform. So we use both IT Act, as well as we also use POXO Act, because pornography is very clearly added under the POXO Act itself, which gives it much more stronger teeth to actually pinning and making the person who is made the offense accountable. Now, there are basically three modes of trafficking. It starts off with the source. I always told you there's always a safety place where they are pulled out. And then in some cases, they are put in, there is a transit mode where they are transported. And sorry, there was a disconnection, but I'm just going to, just start all over again. Just give me some time. So yeah, so what happens is, even with regard to the trafficking modes, there are basically three modes of trafficking. One is source, transit, and destination. Source is where they are removed out of their safety network, transported, and always transmitted to another destination where they are completely new. And it is at this destination that they are usually exploited. Now, some of the main observations that we need to understand is this is hidden in plain sight. Many of us are just not aware, even if it's happening right in front of us. It is kind of hard for us unless we actually look into it, right? So it's hidden in plain sight. There are high chance of missing, right? Even as a team, when we went for doing rescues, what we have seen is we have missed out, because the information just gets passed on. There are government officials involved, but still, because the other side is very much organized and they are much more smarter when in terms of enforcing their kind of offenses, they sometimes get the intel much faster than we get their intel. So there's high chance of missing. Sometimes they are hidden faster. It's very difficult to act, and it takes place really, really quickly. So these are some of the main things that we see. Yeah. And how do we, approach it? One of the most important thing for us to understand is the approaches that we need to start off with will be prevention, right? Start off with prevention mode. It is not easy to, rescue a person and, change the persons, but it's always much, much easier for us to start off with prevention activities, to bring in awareness as much, whether it's in school, in Anganwadis, in government officials, in judiciary, in your own villages. If there's if it's a hotspot, what do we do? How do we bring in awareness? And also to reduce the issues that can lead to trafficking. It could be financial inequality, it could be financial issues, economic issues, it could also be caste atrocities. But to, bring a change in the way, in these of the hot reasons, then definitely what we can see is we can also reduce the risk of being exploited, right? So prevention is key. And obviously the next part would be identification. Identification is very important. And when you're doing an identification, we need enough intel, right? And we cannot just barge in. If you see the NDPS Act, they do it with an organized intention, right? They know how to pin them. Or if you do a cyber crime is so easily, it's so easily organized, right? So in the same way, the enforcement team is also easily organized. The same thing is applicable even for human trafficking, because the team needs to be really, really, equipped to handle rescues, which means your intel must be strong. And when we do a rescue, we need an entire team, because the same identification will be questioned in court if it's not done as per procedures established by law. If you don't have your district magistrate in charge for a bonded labor rescue, definitely, even if it goes to court, it will be a huge irregularity, and the court needs to, look into it more directly, look into more corroborative evidence to actually see whether the identification was legal or not. The same thing happens for special police officer, right? Under a sexual exploitation, trafficking, offense, if you do not have your special police officer under the ITPA who is leading your rescue and who does not come to court and testify, that is an irregularity which can be questioned by the opposite counsel. I'm not saying that can lead to acquittals, but that can lead to some question in the minds of the judge, and we don't want to do that, right? So identification is key. When you are getting enough intel, it is important also to hit the location as fast as possible to ensure that the victims are rescued. Otherwise, the victims will be displaced soon, right? Give information to the district magistrate or whoever is in authority, give them the information and ask them to formulate a team as quickly as possible and rescue them. Now, in some cases, like in the ITPA, punch witnesses are very, very important. You need to have two punch witnesses who can see, and they need to be independent. One can be a man and one can be a woman. In also, again, sexual exploitation, you need a bogus customer to ensure that there was transactions involved and actually the girl was selected for exploitation. So we need all of that. Whereas under the Bonded Labor Act, what is most important is to have the DM's team be present at the rescue and ensure, and the victims are able to are able to be brought about from, or are able to be removed out of the location as soon as possible. Again, when we do, one thing we need to understand is when we do that rescue, please ensure that you take all the evidence that is there, right? It could be money, it could be the books of accounts, the register. All of this evidence needs to be collected, and then even when you do a rescue, please ensure that you provide enough comfort to the victim. The victim shouldn't see you also as someone who just wants to come and remove you out, right? So show empathy even at that stage where you need to really come out of it. Please show empathy. Ensure that you take the belongings of the victims, no matter whether it's whether it is as small as their photographs of their children, photographs of their parents, or whatever. Also ensure that you take all their identity proofs, because once lost, it is hard for them to get it back. So please ensure you take their identity proofs as well. All of the evidence that is against the accused, please take them as well, and ensure that the police handles them rather than you handling them. Please ensure that the police takes it, the police collects it, and the police uses procedure to seal those evidence, right? So that is why rescue is very important. Once the rescue is done, what we see is we have to rehabilitate them really well, ensure that they are provided with therapy, they are provided with rehabilitation programs, because just rescuing is not key, right? We need to ensure that they are able to come out of this trauma, they are able to come out as citizens, or as humans who can actually face the world. They are much stronger than us, so it's just about providing them support, right? So rehabilitation and reintegration is key. Again, following up with what is due to them is very, very important. It could be a small compensation of 20,000 or 1 lakh, but to ensure that we follow up and they get that compensation, right? Most of the time we just leave it there. That's where we need to change. We need to ensure that we need to provide them that support, and also for them to follow up for their own compensation, which is a wrong done to them, right? So rehabilitation and reintegration is key. And the last one is prosecution. Again, prosecution is something that I need to talk a lot. It's just not easy. It's just not just about rehabilitating them, but to ensure that there is a strong prosecution case. And when you mean strong prosecution case, I would say the victims should be equipped to come and give their testimony, right? It is on the victim. Like, it should not be on the NGO to force them to come and testify. We need to equip them to such an extent that they feel that, no, now I understand that this is my case and I need to come and rescue and come and do, the proper evidence against the accused. Now, again, when we do that, please ensure that the victims are provided with the basic facilities. If they are daily wagers, it's not easy for them to just come and testify. I know, because I'm in court, they need to come. Whatever said and done, we know how the court system is. Don't leave them there alone. Please ensure that you provide them the support, at least provide them with the basic things of providing them, their ticket fares, giving them meals a day. If they need to stay, give them a place to stay. If that's the little most that we can do for them, because as such, we know that the courts don't have budgets. Even if we advocate for the budgets takes a lot of time to come. We cannot wait for the cases to go on like that. We need to take up some steps, and I would recommend that as NGOs we need to actually pull in at least so much funds so that our victims can come back and testify. What are the main features under 370? If you tell me consent of the victim is immaterial, so even if the victim says I'm doing it of my own free will, the reason we need to give them time, because they don't trust anybody. So that is why we call it consent of the victim is immaterial at the point of rescue. But once they've come out of the trauma, they are definitely going to tell the truth, right? So just for the rescue part, it is important to understand that consent of the victim is immaterial. But when you go to court, and when the court analyzes, the court needs to understand from where this victim is talking about, right? So in many cases, even though the consent is immaterial, when it comes to court, especially after the trauma, we expect the victims to actually state what has happened and why did they give consent at that point of time. The punishment can go from 7 to 10. Trafficking of minors can start from 10 years. If there are multiple offenses, it starts with 14 years. If authorities are involved, it starts with life imprisonment. And we need to understand that this is a non-bailable offense. Now, how do we, do a procedure? Like, everybody asks me, how does the procedure look? So the first thing that we need to understand is that we need to file a complaint. Whichever authority we go, please give in a written complaint. Oral complaints will do, but just for our own sake, it's important to give a written complaint so that you know what you're giving. Even while giving a complaint, please write down to who are you referring, what is the subject matter, put down the facts in such a way there is chronology stating that what is the information you received, how long the person has been working. If you know of the accused name, please write down the accused name. If you think these things will lead into a lot of swap of information, then please at least let them know the jurisdiction where it is. Have the team tell the team to accompany you to the place of rescue. We can do that, but again, depending on facts and circumstances, you will have to play it around. some of the officials will not be very happy doing that. So if that's the case, I think then you will have to take the risk of giving the information. So it will all depend on how your jurisdiction looks like, how your police looks like, and how much of information you have to give. But whatever you do, please give it in chronology. Please ensure that you give as much information to the police so that the police is able to understand that this is a very serious offense, right? So that's how you start off with a complaint. And obviously, in many cases, what we see is a complaint is done, a GDR is done, or a date entry is done at the government diary, and the team immediately moves in, right? The team must consist of the main authority. If there are children involved, please involve either the SJPU, or to have a CWC member. If you don't have a CWC member, at least representative of an NGO, and also the other members. Now, if it's a BLSA, please include your DM's team. That could be a tahsildar, a village accountant, whoever he is designated. If it's a sexual exploitation, again, involve the person who is actually supposed to lead the rescue. So once you have done the rescue, the first thing under the legal process is to do an FIR, right? Because only once you do an FIR, you can actually move in the process, which is the initiation of a complaint starts off, or the initiation of investigation starts off with an FIR. Once the FIR is done, then we do the 161 statements. 161 statements is nothing. Don't get worried when you hear 161. People just get worried. Nothing to be worried about. It's just statements that the police will take, whoever was there at the point of rescue. So, the first statements that they'll take will be of the victims. So when a victim gives their statements, please ensure that they give with clarity. They do, and also when you are trying to advocate, please try telling the police officers not to ask the same questions 10 times. And also to have interpreters and translators if translators are required. Provide the victims or the survivors that a support when these questions are put forward. I would say if there's a social worker, great. So 161 statements are basically that. And then in some cases, especially when children are involved, the sexual exploitation, we also ensure that 164 is taken, wherein the magistrate records the statements of the victim or the survivor. And then all the other evidence are taken into consideration, especially if there are money involved, there are weapons involved, all of them are sealed. There is something called the panchnama. Please ensure that whoever is the witnesses, please sign on that panchnama. So if you're called out to be a witness, please sign on the panchnama, read out, because you witnesses are the ones who are going to corroborate the case. And then the police will then file the charge sheet at the court. And once the charge sheet is filed at the court and the court has taken cognizance of the offense, then trial starts. And once the trial starts, all of them who have given statements needs to come to court and testify. It is here that you need to ensure that whatever you stated in the statement, is corroborated and the judge believes you. So that at the end of the day, it's a human being sitting there. Provide them with clarity. Provide them with the understanding that this has actually happened. So do not fear, provide them enough clarity, and that's all matters. Obviously, the other side, the opposite counsel is going to ask a lot of questions, confuse you, but stand strong. Ensure that these questions could be asked. It is always ideal to have a lawyer who can help you in assisting the prosecution. If you don't have a lawyer assisting in the prosecution, please get help from the prosecutor himself. He'll be there to help you, to give you, ways in which you can be prepared. And once the trial is done, then there is arguments given. And after the arguments, judgment takes place. So this is a very easy way of putting in, the facts and circumstances, or, the procedures. Again, we do have AHTUs, anti-human trafficking units. In some states is very efficient, in some states is not. Charge sheet scrutiny is something which is very important. Prosecutors need to just look into the charge sheet and see if the facts and circumstances, the evidence collected, and the sections corroborate, and there is enough and more evidence to prove this case. That is what the prosecutor needs to do. And also, once you've done the trial, do understand that victims can have video conferencing. Even Supreme Court has been very vocal about it, like to ensure if the victim cannot come, please ensure there is video conferencing, right? Facility is done if it's so hard for the victim to come down. If the victim is not able to come, in cases in those. But as much as possible, I would say if you can bring your victim to the court, it makes a lot of difference, right? Because when a person stands before a judge and the judge is listening to that person, the story of what has gone through, the way the judges see the case will be totally different. And that's how it is even when we I'm just sharing my screen again. So when you are, when there is, when a person comes to court and testifies, the judge actually sees the person, and it's very different, right? And the same thing happens in a conference too. When you're right in a conference, you're able to, grasp more than when you're in an online conference, unless you are, you're used to the members and the team. Online is not the best source of going forward, especially when a judge who is sitting in the court needs to understand the mannerisms, the reasons why a person is saying certain things. And apart from just listening to the story, they also observe every witness. So it's important, I feel, to have witnesses come to court and testify. But again, there are also places where victims, it's so difficult for the victim. It's in a Naxal prone area or from a different state like, Bangladesh or Nepal. And for them to come, it's kind of unimaginable. In such cases, obviously, we can request for video conferencing facilities as well. But there are also a lot of challenges which I want to say. One thing we need to understand is there's too many procedures, right? And so unless there's a lawyer or a person who is skilled with law, it is kind of difficult for us to actually go through each and everything. Second thing is lack of coordination. If we are part of NGOs, we know that there is very less coordination, right? And obviously corruption is also another hand that makes it harder for us to do rescues and do it efficiently. And most of the cases, what we see is less of convictions. There is minimum convictions. Like I do also normal cases, and the thing I see is there are very, very less human trafficking cases that comes forward, and even in those cases, very few victims come forward and testify. So there is, because of which there is very less convictions. There's hostile witnesses. A lot of witnesses turn hostile. Sometimes there's a lot of budgetary constraints, even in providing compensation to the victims. Lack of resources as such, whether it is starting from identification till rehabilitation, we see that resources are very less. And obviously government stakeholders are also part of a lot of other committees and also part of some general work, and it's not easy for them to prioritize because this is not a special area at all for them. And there's a lot of preconceived notions about this because this is part of the societal issue as well. So as for example, caste atrocity is part, and they do not see, they also think that sometimes bonded labor like situation is because they are part of the society and it's kind of normal. And we also see acquittals coming out due to that. So there's a lot of preconceived notions running around through stakeholders and even for us, right? It's not just for stakeholders who are actually doing the rescue or adjudicating, but even for NGOs, we have our own struggles of understanding certain things. So there's a lot of preconceived notions which needs to be removed out, especially the ones that's not helping out in actually efficient adjudication or efficient removal of the issue as such. So what are the solutions? First thing we need to do is to do substantial investment, right? Whether we are part of an NGO, whether we are part of the government, there must be substantial investment in the terms of knowledge transfer, in terms of coordination, and in terms of budgetary allocation as well. If we are planning to scale up, we need to do it efficiently, right? So substantial investment is something that we need to think about. Second one is proper evidence building. Whatever we do, most of the time what we see is whether it's a government or whether it's the team as such, we don't have enough data to show what we have done. So there must be enough data and evidence to bring in the next set of scaling up. So evidence building is something very important. Third is there should be a responsibility on the state. This cannot run on the shoulders of an NGO. This needs to run on the responsibility on the state, and we need more adjudication. We need more policymakers to actually drill in that this is an issue that even our CSR team can take it up, which what we've seen right now is that human trafficking is a subject that CSR team also don't want to take it up. somehow we need to bring this into the process of bringing a change, right? And the only way of doing this is to actually change the way the policymakers think about this issue, and also to allocate funds, right? Now, if you see every NGO, if there's a lot of work done around education by the governments as well, and even CSR team wants to do it on it, but they don't want to touch on human trafficking. So some way we need to build in that this is also a subject that needs a lot of work, right, and a lot of funding. So that responsibility needs to be on the state. Third, another important thing is victim centric approach. Most of the time, victims are treated as victims, and this is an issue throughout, whether it's POXO matter, ITP, or BLSA. Victim centric approach is the last thing on stakeholders' mind. So that needs to change. Interlinked coordination is the only way possible. We know there's a myriad of laws myriad of laws and procedures involved. So if there is no enough coordination between these teams, it's not going to work out. So we need to build in timelines which should be efficiently coordinated. So right now we have a lot of flow charts, we have a lot of handbooks, but at the end of the day, when you do a rescue, we don't see efficiency. So that needs to change. That needs to be brought about only if responsibility of the state also is much, much higher. Consistent accountability, right? Whoever does whatever work, there needs to be accountability throughout, and evaluate constantly. Whatever work we do, we need to see whether it's bringing in success, whether it's bringing in change, whether there is a social audit that's taking place in each of these acts. If not, how do we ensure that it is done so that we are able to scale up? Otherwise, we'll never be able to scale up. So I would like to say that it's a concerted, convergent approach that is required, and with a high responsibility on the state to provide for their citizens and for others who are actually within vulnerable situations. So with this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you so much for patiently listening.